We are a Black-led, community-centered voting rights organization working to protect and expand the voting rights of Black Floridians across the state of Florida. And we are excited to have you all here for our day at the Capitol. Give yourselves a hand.
Take a moment to welcome you to our house. This is the people's house. It doesn't belong to any one person, any one race, any one religion, nor any one party. It belongs to all of us. So I thank you for your engagement. I thank you for being here today to come out to engage with your government, to let them know that you exist.
We decided to join Equal Ground today to say we won't be ignored, and we plan to voice our opposition and approval of bills being pushed here in Florida. Our personal concerns are directed to the anti-Black legislation active and taking place in Florida.
On your watch that you didn't push back, that you said Florida will be recognized for its wisdom, not weaponry, that Florida would be recognized for the fact that it's about beauty and not bullying, and I'm counting on you to help me do it. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. My name is Jasmine Burney Clark. I am the founder and consulting director of Equal Ground Education Fund and Equal Ground Action Fund, for those of you who don't know. We have folks joining us tonight from both Facebook and from YouTube, so please feel free to share this live with any Floridian you know, particularly Black Floridians who are at the other end of direct attacks from our legislature and from our governor. We are here tonight to specifically talk about this year's Florida's legislative session and Senate Bill 7050. It is one of 3 voter suppression bills that has been introduced in our Florida legislature since Governor DeSantis took office in 2018, and it will be the 3rd bill that will be signed by this governor since also taking office. As of today, there has not been a signature on this specific bill making it a law yet. And so we are doing a final and last effort to appeal to Floridians across the state of Florida, that you have one final chance to also appeal to the governor as that bill makes it to his desk. This coming Friday will be the final day of Florida's legislative session, we hope. As our legislature is no stranger to special sessions, that is also possible as well. As we talk about tonight's Senate Bill 50, I do want to lay out for folks who don't know what the history of voter suppression has been in the state of Florida since the year 2000, and talk a little bit about how Black and brown folks have been on the receiving end of this type of oppression. So in year 2000, nearly 12,000 voters were purged from the voter rolls, and they were wrongfully identified as convicted felons or returning citizens. And 41% of them happened to be Black folks. In 2010, Black voters utilized the option to vote early at higher rates than any previous election. And in 2011, the Florida legislature cut early voting days in half. In 2018, we saw a huge victory for 1.8 million returning citizens through a citizen ballot initiative that was giving them the right to automatic rights restoration and or voting rights restoration. And in 2019, a poll tax was implemented by this legislature to require that they pay their fees, fines, and restitution before they could actually access their right to vote. And then in 2020, Black voters utilized drop boxes during a COVID pandemic at a higher rate than any previous election, 8.4% higher specifically. And in 2021, the legislature passed Senate Bill 90, limiting the use of drop boxes. It also doubled down on that oppression in 2022 by passing Senate Bill 524, which instituted an election police task force. So this task force is quite an interesting one, as it is undefined in our state of Florida with its specific tasks under the task force, but it does come with a multi-million-dollar budget that allows for them to be able to utilize this in ways that they see fit. What we were able to see in 2020 was that prior to the primary election, our state chose to use this specific office and weaponize it to target returning citizens. And so tonight we want to talk a little bit about what this new bill, Senate Bill 7050, looks like, how it will impact us as Black Floridians, how it will impact third-party voter registration organizations like ours, like your NAACPs, churches, sororities, fraternities, different independent organizations. Joining me this evening is our political director, Genesis Robinson, as well as our faith outreach director. I'm going to hand it over to Genesis now to talk a little bit about Senate Bill 7050. Feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions that you may have. And if we don't get to them this evening, we'll certainly be able to answer them after tonight.
All right. Well, thank you, Jasmine, and good evening to everyone who is joining us online. As Jasmine mentioned, my name is Genesis Robinson. I'm the political director for the organization, and I'm excited to have you all join us as we talk about a bill that will have serious implications for all of us, right? This is the third year in a row that the legislature has attacked our voting rights, and we wanted to take a moment as we are heading into the last week of legislative session to give you an update about this bill before the governor signs it and let you know what it does. So first and foremost, Senate Bill 7050 builds upon the legacy of voter suppression in the state of Florida. Florida is infamous for voter suppression. Jasmine sort of laid out that timeline of what it has looked like over the last a few years as it relates to measures that impact our voting rights. And so this bill is what we refer to as an omnibus bill. It contains literally everything that you can think of in one piece of legislation. First and foremost, the overarching thing that I want to impress upon you all is this bill attacks third-party voter registration organizations. So you may say, what is a third-party voter registration organization? A third-party voter registration organization is someone like Equal Ground, your local church, your local sorority, fraternity, right, that go out into the community and register people who ordinarily would not be registered to vote. And so this bill attacks these type of organizations through various ways. Many of them include new fines and fees, right? So in the event that we run afoul of the rules or we make a mistake, they can now fine and assess fees upwards of $250,000. So we're talking a lot of money, right? There are also new regulations and rules that these organizations must comply with. Things that we have been able to do in the past without a problem, now they want to put an end to it because they know that we're being effective and we're actually out in the community registering people and getting them involved. Another thing that this bill does on third-party voter organizations is it limits the way that we're able to do our job. Previously, we were given a certain amount of time to turn in applications and be able to assist voters, but now they have shrunk that window and made it more difficult for us to do that type of work. And so we're going to talk a little bit about more of that in depth in a few minutes, but I just wanted to kind of give you an overall viewpoint, right, of what this bill does. So it attacks a third-party voter registration organization. It also attacks returning citizens. So if you all remember, in 2018, we all voted for an amendment that was on our ballot to determine if people who had felony convictions would have their rights to vote restored automatically upon finishing their sentence. 64% of Floridians voted in favor of that amendment. It passed. However, the legislature was not in agreement with the fact that citizens had taken it into their own hands to pass some good policy and some good laws. And so what they did is they went in and muddied the water in the legislative session right after that with another piece of legislation that now says you have to pay your fines and fees as a part of your sentence, right? And so it's not enough to go to jail and get out of jail, but as part of that sentence, you now have to pay your fines and your fees. And so what happened in the 2020 election is you had hundreds of returning citizens all throughout the state of Florida who exercised their right to vote because they had registered to vote and received a voter registration card, and they went and voted. But the state of Florida went and arrested these people and said that they were ineligible to vote and they should not have been voting. And as a result, a lot of these people had to go to jail. And so what the state is doing with this law is now they're putting language on everyone's voter registration card. We're all going to get new voter registration cards. And on these cards, it will say proof of this card does not mean eligibility to vote. It simply means that you're registered, right? And so that is a way that the government is sort of trying to backtrack, because the defense of a lot of those returning citizens was, hey, I have a voter registration card. Y'all sent this to me. How can you tell me that I'm breaking the law and not eligible to vote when I have this card that you sent me? So now the government is putting the onus on the voter to determine if they've paid all their fines and fees. Incredibly punitive and just wrong. But to take it a step further, now they're telling returning citizens that they can't even register people to vote. So if you have a felony conviction, despite the fact that you have sought to have your rights restored, despite the fact that you're a well-intentioned member of our society, you will not be able to register people to vote when the governor signs this bill into law. So that's a shame. We wanted to make sure that folks are aware of that. Three other things. The bill also prohibits non-citizens from being able to register people to vote, right? So here we talk about culture wars and attacks on different communities, right? So now we're attacking immigrants by saying somehow they're untrustworthy or undeserving or unable to register people to vote. And then we're now saying the same thing about returning citizens. And then there's a provision in there called resign to run. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that and the implications of that. But those are the kind of the 4 or 5 things that I want you all to remember about this bill. One, it attacks third-party voter rights organizations who do the work every day of registering people to vote and keeping them informed about our election law. So that's organizations like Equal Ground. 2, it attacks returning citizens. So people who have paid their debt to society and just want to reintegrate back into society, it attacks those communities. 3, it goes after non-citizens, immigrants, right? People who don't have legal status as U.S. citizens, but want to be a part of helping to make sure that people have their right and they're exercising their right to the ballot box. 4, resign to run. They have made a pathway for the governor to be able to run for higher political office at the expense of Floridians. And it is really a carve out. And when we talk about it a little bit later, you'll see it's literally a carve out that they designed specifically for the governor. And so that's not right. But then most importantly, 5th is this is the 3rd year in a row that we have seen these type of attacks. Jasmine talked about Senate Bill 90. She talked about Senate Bill 524. We talked about redistricting, right? Back in 2020 and what we saw last year in 2022 when they redrew the maps. This is a repeated offense by this state to attack our voting rights. And so we just wanted to let you all know about this latest iteration of an attack. And so at this time, I'm going to walk through certain sections of the bill and give you all some information on certain language that is included in the bill. So if you can bear with me just one second. All right. So first and foremost, like I said, overarching, this bill attacks voting rights organizations And so one of the things that they're requiring now is that every election cycle, voting rights organizations must register to request to be able to register people to vote, right? So think about what that means, right? Like if you just have a pop-up event in your community and you say, oh, this is a good opportunity to go register people to vote, and you have not pre-registered with the state and asked for permission, that would be illegal for you to, organize that little mini voter registration campaign, right? And so these are organizations that have done this work year after year, time after time, and now the state is telling us that we have to request permission to be able to register people to vote. Can't vote for the people, they're simply registering them to vote and giving them the option to exercise their vote when that time comes. Another thing, as I talked about earlier with returning citizens and immigrants. So in the event that you register people to vote, you now have to sign an affidavit that says everyone collecting voter registration on behalf of your organization is either American citizen or you attest that they don't have a felony conviction. I want to take a moment for any of you who may be listening who have experience in managing people and working in large organizations, right? Or even smaller organizations. That is a very difficult thing to keep up with, right? When you're talking about voting registration organizations throughout the state of Florida, and they have massive operations, you're talking thousands of people that could have a hand in registering people to vote. And so now to subject these organizations to this punitive penalty of fines and fees, it's just terrible. And so we wanted to make sure that you all were aware of that. All right, let me go down here. So another thing, when we register people to vote moving forward, and this applies to everybody, right? So if you're listening and you work with a church or you work with the organization civically, this will apply to you. You will now be required to provide a receipt to everyone that you register to vote, right? So this receipt does not guarantee, so basically this receipt is proof that the voter tried to register to vote. You have to indicate what organization it was, what the person's name, and a host of other information that they're requiring to be on the receipt. But here's the piece about the receipt. The receipt, they say, is protection in the event that a voter registration application did not get turned in. However, they're not allowing individuals to use said receipt to vote in the event that their voter registration application was not received, right? And so it's just really a sham to really catch up organizations. It really holds no real teeth other than, like I said, trying to find an extra way to find organizations. So the receipt piece is just very debilitating. And in addition to that, like I said earlier, it cuts down the time to turn in applications from 14 days to 10. So previously, if you were registering people to vote, you had 14 days to make sure that their application was turned in. Now they're reducing that down to 10 days. Again, another burden for large or even small organizations. And then they're raising the cap for fines to $250,000. So to put this in perspective, 2 years ago, the cap was $1,000. So this is the total amount of fees that you can be assessed from the state. Used to be $1,000. That was the absolute most. Now they're raising that cap to $250,000, right? So when we talk about the implications of this, when we talk about what impact that's going to have on our churches, the impact that's going to have on our smaller groups who just go out and help folks in their community, now they have to take an assessment and determine if this is something that they want to be a part of, knowing that one small mistake could potentially cost them up to $250,000, right? And so, again, this was included in the final bill that passed the legislature. A few more, and then we're going to bring in Pastor McCoy. It creates a third-degree felony for copying information from the voter registration form. So voter registration organizations have historically used the information provided when people register to vote as a means to turning them out to vote, right? It's one thing to register to vote, but we want to make sure that you get to the polls. And so we have historically used the information, which is all public information, on that form to say, okay, you know, Genesis registered to vote today. I have his number. When we get a little bit closer to election day, I'm going to give him a call and make sure that he remembers to go and vote. It is now a felony if we retain any of that information from that form. Again, you have to ask yourself, why are these type of things being implemented, right? It's all punitive attack on voting rights organizations who are doing the work every single day. All right. So another thing, and we're going to bring Pastor McCoy in after this, is it gives the supervisor of elections office broader authority to not only purge people from the rolls, right? But then it also gives them the ability to reject more ballots. So in this law, there's new signature matching training where all of the supervisors of elections office and their staff would have to go through new training, which would increase the likelihood that more ballots get rejected for signature. So they're going to tighten up on signatures, right? So you remember, like, you know, back in the day when you signed your signature, you may have signed it, took the time to actually do it the right way. And whereas now you may just kind of scribble in something, that's not going to fly anymore. The state is tightening up on those restrictions, and they're going to make it, you know, more difficult for people who do not have almost an identical match of the signature that they have on file. And so if you know someone who has had a signature change, if you yourself have had your signature change, please get in touch with your SOE and update the signature that you have on file, because we do not need ballots being rejected for that reason. In addition to that, they now have the authority to reject ballots that arrive in more than one envelope. So I'll give you an example. Husband and wife decide to vote by mail, and they say, you know, what the heck, we're married, we're gonna, you know, we live at the same address, we're gonna stick both of our ballots in one envelope and send it in. If you do that, you can now have your ballots rejected, right? And so that is something that a lot of people have done over the years. And so our fear is that with all of these changes in place, people are not going to be aware, and they're going to fall into the trap of being impacted disproportionately by these laws. And so that's why we want to have this conversation tonight. We'll continue to have more conversations about the impact of Senate Bill 7050 and the bad pieces of this legislation. So I want to bring Pastor McCoy in at this time to talk a little bit about the impact that this legislation will have on churches and our smaller community organizations who do democracy work. As I mentioned, we're going from $1,000 that you could have been assessed in fines and fees to $250,000. Folks, this is a huge jump. This is a drastic jump. In fact, last year in Senate Bill 524, they went from 1,000 to 50,000, right? So yes, that's a big jump. But now we're going from 50,000 to 250,000. So Pastor McCoy, if you could talk a little bit about what you're hearing from, you know, the faith community and the pastors that you work with, and, you know, how this will certainly impact their operation.
Thank you so much, Genesis. Okay, folks, let's take a deep breath. A lot is happening around this particular legislation. And so I want to just pause here and really kind of give you a context about the faith outreach arm of Equal Ground. Equal Ground is so blessed to work with faith leaders ranging from the Panhandle all the way down to Miami. We have what is called and have established what is called the Florida Network of African American Clergy Alliance presidents. And these are individuals who are presidents over local ministerial alliances that have churches under them. And so we have a reach of about more than 1,200 churches in about 15 different counties. So this really does impact the work on the ground. Historically, we know that churches within the African American tradition have been the conduit, the place where voter registration has taken place. And as Genesis has outlined through a comprehensive and concise manner, there is a strategic attack because the work is working. All right. That they're coming after us because what you're doing on the ground is working. No, we don't get everyone that we would like, but the things that we are doing are moving the needle, and they are coming after us from every angle. The biblical text tells us in Corinthians that we have to be ignorant. We cannot be ignorant of Satan devices. And this is why we are lifting this up, because we need you to go back to your churches, go back to your civic engagements arm, and let them know we cannot do business as usual, or we will be going to jail, because they are coming after us. They are coming after what you are doing because it is working. So I want to employ all of you all that are working within the faith community, within churches, to please understand these changes that are happening, because the fines and fees are going up, and they're already charging people. There's already organizations who are going through litigation right now because of some of the issues that have been brought up. And so I think one of the things that I do want to say as we transition to other parts of our presentation on today is that we cannot continue to allow our voices to be silent around these issues. And so you're going to hear later on opportunities for you to get engaged. But this informational session is just that, an informational session, but we have to take it a step further. So I thank you so much for joining. I thank you for listening attentively. And hey, it's a few of us on. I need more on. Let's like, share, and love. Tell somebody, let's get into this conversation, because we perish because of a lack of knowledge. I'm giving it to Jasmine, who's going to move us into litigation around some of the things that we're going with.
Perfect. So before I talk about litigation, I do want to talk about some of the solution-oriented ways that we have been trying to address this specific issue. So as you know, the bill was heard in committee, or excuse me, in the entire session last week in front of the House and in front of the Senate. And as this bill was heard, we joined a number of statewide organizations that you all are familiar with in addressing the Senate President and the Speaker of the House, asking them for some very specific things that we thought could be addressed before this bill reached its final destination. And we have serious concerns, as Genesis laid out, about being a third-party voter registration organization, particularly around the requirements, deadlines, and the fines. So not only will fees and fines be increased to $250,000, but the time frame around submitting a voter registration card will now be down from 14 days to 10 days. So you already have to submit your voter registration cards in the county where you've collected them. We are headquartered in Orange County with staff throughout the entire state. And living in Orange County, it is a high transit area. I could be in Orange County and register folks from Seminole, Volusia, Pinellas, or a number of different counties. Those cards have to be returned back to that specific place, and you have to do it within a 10-day time frame. And so we appealed to the legislature, asking them to return it back and reestablish that 14-day time frame that we have been working around for the past few years in the state of Florida. It should be noted that there will be a disproportionate impact on communities of color, given the fact that 1 out of every 10 people who are registered to vote in the state of Florida are registered by organizations like ours, compared to 1 out of 50 white voters in the state of Florida. So our work is critical. It is incredibly important. The other thing we asked was that they refrained from including language on those voter registration cards. As Genesis stated, it currently does require that if you receive a card, it doesn't mean that you're eligible to vote. It just simply means that this card is proof of registration, not actual verification of your eligibility to be able to vote. And then we also made some requests and specific concessions around voting by mail. Your legislators made a number of different amendments to the bill on last week in both the House and the Senate, and unfortunately, they were not received with much attention and seriousness. But that does not mean that there isn't an opportunity to continue having these conversations, specifically given the fact that it has not been signed yet, and the last stop is headed to the governor's desk. Genesis, did you want to add anything there before I go into the litigation?
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about how they have built upon each of these issues year after year after year, right? As I said earlier, we had $1,000 cap for fines and fees. Then it went to 50,000. Then it went to now $250,000, right? With Senate Bill 90, we saw the curtailing of the use of drop boxes. Then it went to only certain locations can have drop boxes. Then it was they had to guard the drop box and it had to be available during certain hours, right? And so basically what I wanted to kind of get across with this point is do not think that this fight is over. They have proven to us 3 years in a row that they will do everything in their power to limit our access and take away our ability to organize and get out the right to vote. And so we have to stay steadfast in this. We can't allow this to be a reason that we retreat and say this is too messy and this is too hard and too difficult and this is exactly why I don't vote. This is the time to double down, to organize, to reach out to people and say we have to make sure that despite all of these changes, that we do our part to make sure that we're registering to vote and getting our people involved, because it's going to increase every single year. I have no reason to not suspect them to increase the fine next year to $500,000. I'm not saying that is the case, but at this rate, right, one could only suspect something like that would happen. And so I think they see every single time how far they can get away and what they can get away with. And once they know that they can get away with something, they continue to build upon that. And so speaking of getting away with something, Jasmine is now going to lead us into a conversation around Senate Bill 90, the restrictive voter registration or the voter suppression bill that was passed in 2021, yes. I believe, right after the 2020 election. So that January, they came in and straight gutted our elections process. So Jasmine, you want to talk a little bit about Senate Bill 90 and the verdict?
Certainly. And before I do that, I will say, Genesis, you bring up a good point. And if you take nothing from tonight's conversation, it should ultimately be that you still have the right to vote in the state of Florida. That cannot be stripped away from you. The way in which you participate in the election process may change, but your actual right to participate has not been taken away. You still have that right. You can still vote. And we plan to make sure that people do that by any means necessary. So do not believe that these new measures on top of previous year's measures will eliminate the work that we are planning to do and working towards. We were established because of this very reason, to guide folks through a difficult process, but it is not an impossible one. So know that you still have that right to be able to participate fully in the elections process. So I want to talk a little bit about Senate Bill 90. Senate Bill 90 was passed in 2021. It was signed into law, and this was the first voter suppression bill we saw under this current administration. This voter suppression bill eliminated the use of drop boxes in the ways that we have seen them be used across our state. They limited its access, where they could be provided and how they could be accessible throughout the state of Florida, and stripped the use of them quite significantly. The other thing we saw was the outlawing of the distribution of food and water and assistance at polling places throughout the state of Florida, to not be able to provide folks with water and food and umbrellas and fans while they are waiting in a state where elections take place during hurricane season and in the middle of the summer is just inhumane. We also saw in Senate Bill 90 that they added ID restrictions to the vote by mail process. So you already have to have an ID to register to vote. So your identity has been verified at the onset of registration. But now they're requiring you to have an ID to request your vote by mail ballot in the state of Florida. Again, creating another barrier to the process. Not impossible, but certainly a little bit more difficult this time around. So we were a part of 290 plus plaintiffs across the state of Florida who filed a lawsuit against the state, specifically the Secretary of State, demanding that this law be overturned. And in the initial case, it was. A judge sided with the plaintiffs in determining that Florida and Florida's legislature had participated in 20 years of intentional discrimination. And we should note that no matter what happens following that, that statement is a fact. That statement is true. I lay that out at the beginning of this conversation, what that 20 years of intentional discrimination looked like. And then our state decided to appeal, and appeals court thought differently about it. And so we continued that appeals process until it was introduced to a 3-judge federal panel on last fall. And this past week, that judicial panel issued a decision in that case. 2-to-1 panel decision. So 2 judges voted in favor of the state, and 1 judge voted in favor of the plaintiffs. Unfortunately, that ruled a significant blow and a significant loss to people of color, voting rights organizations, and advocates in the state of Florida. And what we saw was that this loss essentially showed us that the court found no violations of the 14th and 15th Amendments under Section 2 of the National Voting Rights Act for any provision. So, for example, the challenge to limitations on drop boxes, solicitation, voter registration disclaimers, that was also another requirement under SB90. The disclaimer stated that as a voter registration organization, we had to share with registrants that we may or may not be able to get your voter registration card into the Supervisors of Elections office in time. And that was designed to diminish our organization's brand, to diminish our viability as an institution. And so that was also something that was challenged. And so what it did was it reversed the district court's decision and decided that there was no discriminatory intent or effect of SB90 on Black voters. And as a result, the court reversed the initial decision. In addition to that, the initial decision also required that there be a pre-clearance. What a pre-clearance is that there would be a requirement for the next 10 years that the legislature would have to go in front of this specific judge and lay out a case about why they want to change election administration laws that directly impacts voters in the state of Florida. And this 3-judge panel, 2 of them decided that that was also no longer a requirement. And so we were dealt a huge blow, unfortunately, under this case. Overall, what this essentially did was the decision affirmed that the work that we are doing in the state of Florida, it does not meet the burden that we tried to prove in the state, despite the lengthy history of known voter suppression, its intention, and the acts that we have seen take place in the state of Florida. So I want to make sure people know what the result is of that case. There is a portion of the case that will go back to the district court where this case initially began, and that particular decision around a specific item of the lawsuit will need to be reheard. And so we are waiting to see what the next steps are. And of course, we will come back and bring this information to you. But Senate Bill 90, as of right now, stands, will remain a law in the state of Florida, and the things that we've outlined previously will remain outlawed until further notice. Another legal update we want to provide you with is that we are litigants, one of 4 organizational litigants in a case against the state of Florida under the redistricting standards here in the state. So last year, Florida participated in the redistricting process, and as a result, our governor decided to draw his own maps. Those maps looked like an elimination of 2 of our Black congressional districts. Florida currently has 28 congressional districts in the state of Florida. 4 of them are considered what is called minority majority districts, and the governor eliminated 2 of the 4 of those districts, one in Central Florida, District 10, and one in North Florida, District 5. We are in court right now and are preparing to address this specific issue and try to obtain those districts back. Florida is unique in that it has 2 amendments, Amendment 5 and Amendment 6, that protect us from this type of political and racial gerrymandering. A lot of states don't have this. And in fact, the National Supreme Court in previous case law cited Florida as the standard bearer in making sure that in order to eliminate racial and political gerrymandering in your process, you need to implement Fair Districts Amendments 5 and 6 like Florida did in order to protect their seats. And so we have seen a direct removal and attack and disregard for those particular amendments under this new redistricting map. And so we look forward to seeing our day in court soon through that process, and we'll obviously come back and let you know what the outcome will be. I will remind you that we are not in unfamiliar territory when it comes to this particular piece of legality. This same situation took place in 2012, where courts determined that the Fair Districts Amendments were designed to protect us again from this type of gerrymandering, and new districts had to be drawn in the state of Florida as a result. So we are hopeful about what the outcome will be in this particular case, but we are also operating with very clear minds and also know what we are up against in the state of Florida. So we look forward to again seeing our day in court and determining what the next steps will be in this particular piece of legislation, a legal case. Genesis, anything you want to add to that?
No, nothing else that I want to add to that. But before we end, I did want to take a moment to, talk a little bit about session as a whole, right? So, as you all may know, Florida is required to have 60 days of regular legislative session, where our legislators go to Tallahassee, they conduct the affairs of our state, and they're required to pass a balanced budget. This year, there have been a little shy of 2,000 bills that have been introduced in Tallahassee. Many of those have, the overwhelming majority of those bills have died and won't see the light of day. There have been a total of 17 bills that have been signed into law, meaning they have passed both the House and the Senate and have been presented to the governor, and the governor signed them. So again, we're talking, like I said, a little bit under 2,000, and only 17 have made it to the finish line to be signed into law. There are another 84 that have passed both chambers, but are waiting on the governor to act. And still, with those two numbers, we're still talking very few bills compared to the number that have been introduced. And so wanted to lift that up for you all. The legislature is set to end on Friday, the 5th. That is supposed to be the last day of legislative session. Tomorrow, we should be getting a look at what the budget will be for the state. The state is required to have what's called a 72-hour cooling off period that allows for us to be able to review and see what's in the budget. So tomorrow is technically that deadline, because 72 hours from tomorrow takes us to Friday. And so hopefully we'll get a chance to see what that budget looks like and have an opportunity to go through it. For those of you who follow our newsletter, next week edition, we will include all the items that are included in the budget, however, are not necessarily law yet, right? Because the governor in the state has the power of what's called a line item veto. So just because it's included in the budget that's passed out of the legislature, the governor then has the opportunity to go through individually and veto and take out certain projects that he is not in favor with. So as always, we're going to try to keep you updated, keep you in the loop about what's going on in Tallahassee. I think before we end, we're going to take a few questions. And so we're going to, now pivot over to the chat. If you have a question, feel free to add it there.
Yep. Before we go into questions, I just want to say again, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. One final thing I'll say is that we are small, We are community centered, we are Black led, and oftentimes what that means is that we are severely underfunded. Our work does not happen without the generous donations of individuals like you all, who help support us in making sure that we can go back and forth to Tallahassee and or come into your communities and make presentations like this, be able to take people to Tallahassee and join us in the process, train individuals to be able to fight against oppression the way that we've been able to do over the past 4 years. We actually turned 4 this month as an organization that was established in May of 2019, and we are excited to still be able to continue to do this work every single day, for you and with you, and definitely not without you. So if you would like to make a donation to our organization, you can do so by visiting equal-ground.com. We will make sure to add a link in the chat so that you're able to be able to make a direct contribution to us as an organization. We want to continue to do this work for as long as you will have us in the state of Florida, and we look forward to also partnering with you. Marcus, let's take it away with questions.
All right, so we're going to post some of the questions that were on from the first one from Tia Elmi. How will the state know who the individuals are who make work with third-party registrants, whether they are a returning citizen?
Great question. And Genesis and I can tag team on these questions. So that is a really good question. It's great because the implementation of this bill has not been thoroughly laid out and designed. There have been lots of questions from us and from fellow legislators about what it looks like to actually implement this program in the state of Florida. And it doesn't seem like that process has been thought out at all. Those questions have gone completely unanswered. And we are waiting to also see what that process looks like. What I can tell you is that currently the state of Florida does require that when you fill out a third-party voter registration application form, you are also supposed to submit the names of the people who will collect those voter registration cards with your organization. I can't tell you what I think the state will probably do with those names once they obtain them, but I think you can imagine what they plan to do with that information once it has been filed with the state and an application process starts. So I can tell you that names are handed over at the time that an application is filled out. But because we do know that the process is going to be revamped and the registration process will be implemented in January of 2025, there is likely going to be a process by which those names go through some sort of scrutiny to determine who's a returning citizen or who is a non-citizen in order to be able to register folks to vote.
Very good. We have some comments in there. All right, we have another one from Miss Angel. Can there be a document where written voters that agree to remain to a remainder call to vote?
So I think what this question may be asking is what else can be done? How can we ensure that people have information about what the next steps are? And Genesis, do you want to talk a little bit about the action that we have?
Yeah, so we have an action right now where we are targeting where we were targeting the legislature, asking them to oppose this legislation because no one has asked for it, no supervisor, no citizen. It's just a terrible piece of legislation. And so we have an action now where we're asking the governor to reconsider and veto this legislation. Now, again, as I mentioned earlier, we know that there's a provision in the bill that makes his life easier and allows him to remain governor as he prepares to run for president. So it's highly unlikely. However, we don't want this moment in history to reflect that we did nothing, right? When we look back at moments where bad things have happened in our history, I often, as an inquisitive mind, say, well, what did the people do? Like, what type of resistance was there, right? And so we want our names to be in the history books as showing that we stood up and we said no. In 2023, when DeSantis and the legislature wanted to pass laws that made it harder for people to access the ballot box, there were people who got on a Facebook and who said something and who spoke up. And so, that's all we're asking is for people to, do their part and making sure that the legislature knows that there's opposition. And so we have a phone to action. We'll be dropping it into the link for you to, make your voice known and let the governor know to oppose this bill.
All right, we have 3 more questions, and then we'll get ready to sign out. Ms. Wilson, has the Florida legislature and Governor DeSantis violated the Fair District legislation?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you for that. So, ultimately, it's going to be for a judge to ultimately decide that. We do know that at the end of the day, the Voting Rights Act, as well as the Fair Districts Amendments in the state of Florida, view minority individuals who lived in close proximity as a protected group and individuals that should have the ability to elect a candidate of their choice, right? So that is something that we know is a fact. What we also know is a fact is that we went into the 2022 election cycle with 4 minority access seats, where there were 4 Black people who were guaranteed to be elected in the event that Black folks in their district turned out, and they changed that. And so now we only have 2 of such districts, right? And so that is what we do know to be true. And so, yes, I will say that I do believe that this was an unconstitutional, takeover of our maps and our elections process. And so ultimately it's going to be for the court to decide that.
All right. 2 more questions. This is one and one more. Ms. Jones wants to know, do you guys have an idea how long it will be before this goes to court?
Yeah, so, I don't have any idea, but one thing that I will say is Senate Bill 90, right, was passed in 2021. So here we are in 2023, and we just got the verdict last week. So if that's any indication, you're looking at about 2 years per lawsuit before they are decided. And so it's a long process. It's a difficult process. It's an expensive process, but it's a necessary process. And so I would say at the very least, maybe, less than a year, but probably, going to be filed this year, right? More challenges.
So the lawsuit was filed in court last fall, and we are just awaiting a court date to determine when the case will be heard before a judge. And our hope is that that will be soon. And again, as soon as we know, we'll let you know and allow for folks to be able to follow us in that process. Senate Bill 90 did have a process where folks were able to listen along as the litigation took place over the course of, I believe, 2 weeks. So we hope that that will be the same case here, but we don't know much detail at this time, but we hope soon.
All right. I said one more question, but I see we got one more. So Brother Troy asks, do you know about the Clean State Initiative?
So it's the Clean Slate Initiative that we are very familiar with. Our great and dear sister, Sheena Mead, is the executive director. She is doing amazing work across the nation, providing clean slate initiative legislation at the federal and at the state level. And so we are certainly supporters and are amplifying the work that she's doing. And we hope to see that work come to Florida certainly really soon. We know that in order to introduce this type of legislation, there has to be the environment for it. And so I'm sure that folks are determining what it looks like for that possibility to be made a reality in Florida.
All right. And then the last question of the night, Ms. Harden, is there a type of liability insurance third-party organizations can purchase to pay for possible fees? Great question.
That's a really great question. And by the look on Jasmine's face, I don't think that's something that's ever come up. But that's a great question. You might have created an industry.
Yeah.
Miss or Miss Harden, we should talk to you offline about what it possibly looks like to get liability insurance for third-party voter registration organizations. That has not been a thought And again, I shared shortly a little bit prior how we are typically the organizations that are the least funded and the least supported when it comes to attacks like this. And $250,000 could bankrupt an organization like ours. And so, if you are a volunteer led organization and don't have the reserves or even paid staff, that automatically sets you up for liability in itself. So, that is something that we should certainly look into a little bit further and have some conversations about. Really great idea. Thank you for lifting that up.
All right, that concludes the question and answer period. We're moving to me.
We are moving to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining. Can you give it up for my colleagues, our consulting director and our political director? I am so honored to be a part of this team of legal and political minds leading the state of Florida. Everyone on this call is below the age of 36, so we are defying odds around young people in the political process. We are defying the odds of Black people in the political process. This is where a lot of us got our start, and we want to thank you for partnering with us on tonight and for sharing this information. Jasmine said something that was so key that I want to kind of move to as we say goodnight, and that is you still can vote. You still can vote. But I want to ask this question: will you vote? With all of these different impediments and structural things that they're trying to say, my question tonight to you is, will you continue to vote? In spite of the adversity, in spite of the different changes, will you still encourage your community to vote? And that is what we need. One preacher said to us in a setting like this, he said, they're going to continue to move the goalposts. And we are nonpartisan. So when I say they, I'm not anyone who is going against voting rights and making it harder for individuals to vote, right? We have so much accessibility in every other area, but with this particular area, we want to continue to regress and stop people from moving forward. And so whoever moves the goalpost, the question is, will you go find where that goalpost is and continue to be a part of the game? Because you cannot be a player if you are not a part of the game. And so we hope tonight has been both informational and inspirational to you as we continue this journey to fight for equality and justice for all. In closing, I want to invite each of you to be a part of our legislative debrief. This is going to be a first of a series of debriefs that will take place. As you know, Equal Ground has been in Tallahassee the entire legislative session, a whole 60 days, just about when we had bills there. Equal Ground was on the ground, whether Jasmine, Genesis, or myself. And so we're going to continue the work. The work does not stop here. And so we will be hosting a legislative debrief specifically for our faith leaders. Again, we have a faith arm that will be held on May the 22nd. At 7 p.m. That's May the 22nd at 7 p.m. More information will come out through our email distribution and text systems, but we want you to get prepared now to be a part of that. We are so honored that the Honorable Representative Diane Hart will be a part of the panel that will be discussing all of the legislation that has happened, both negative and positive, and the things that are affecting our community. She is our Congressional Black Caucus chair, and so we are honored to have her and honored for this opportunity to share with you. So mark your calendars now, May the 22nd at 7 p.m. We will be having a virtual legislative debrief and going into a deeper dive of all that took place during the 2023 legislative session. Before I conclude with my final words, colleagues, anything you want to add? All right, I leave you with this quote that I leave all of my calls with. My father told us at a young age, son, no one can do everything, but everyone can do something, and no one should do nothing. This is our something. I pray you find your something and continue to be divinely inspired by God to make the effective change in our communities that he has called us to make. Thank you so much for joining. We look forward to seeing you. And hey, Jasmine put it in there. I'm going to put it. Hey, if you want to donate $5, $10, $2, whatever you want to do, go to equal-ground.com and help us as we make change across the state of Florida and our nation. Good night, and God bless you.